Have you ever felt that nagging suspicion that the world around you is operating by a set of rules that just don't quite fit you? You know, like the easy answers everyone else seems to embrace completely miss the nuanced reality you experience. Well, today we're taking a deep dive into an incredibly insightful set of sources that challenges exactly that feeling. Our mission is to explore what the author calls the autistic heroine's journey into literacy. We'll be uncovering how education systems fundamentally impact gestalt language processors, or GLPs, and, maybe surprisingly, even the dedicated teachers working within those systems.
It's a really fascinating journey, actually, because our sources, they start by tackling a question you hear a lot in education. If you could change one thing, just one, to make life better for GLPs, what would it be?
Right, that classic silver bullet question.
Exactly. But the material immediately makes us pause. It argues that question itself. Well, it might be flawed.
Interesting. How so?
It sort of sets us on this path that resists simple fixes. It reveals a narrative arc that wasn't born from, abstract theory, but from lived experience, from survival, really.
That's a powerful way to frame it. So as we dive in, what are some of the most profound connections we'll uncover between these deeply ingrained systems and how we perceive learning, language, even ourselves? I suspect we're in for some significant shifts in perspective here.
Oh, absolutely. You'll gain, I think, a unique understanding of how seemingly neutral classroom practices can shape identities and careers, too. We'll connect everything from, elementary school data walls, the really demanding process of teacher credentialing, all the way to, quite unexpectedly, critical theory.
Wow.
Yeah, showing how all these elements kind of intertwine to create a specific kind of reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start where our author begins, what they call the ordinary world, which, as you said, sounds anything but neutral. So picture your typical educational landscape. Classrooms filled with charts, benchmarks, reading levels, maybe those color-coded data walls.
Right. All presented as the gold standard, science in education. But our source argues that, in practice, this landscape often functions more as a system of, sorting, and crucially, exclusion.
Okay, so how does this connect directly to the experience of gestalt language processors, GLPs?
Well, this is key. For GLPs who naturally process language in whole chunks, think of a kid learning a favorite song lyric or a whole phrase, not breaking it down.
Right, they grab the whole gestalt.
Exactly. This system, the benchmark system, inherently frames their natural way of holding language as a failure. It creates this constant, relentless threat.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine a child who instinctively scripts a song lyric, maybe something meaningful to them. Instead of decoding, say, nonsense words on a worksheet, they might get shamed or corrected. That's not reading,
I see.
So these decorations on the walls, the charts designed to track progress, they can actually become instruments of shame, highlighting perceived deficits instead of recognizing a different but equally valid way of knowing and communicating.
It sounds like this system sets up an almost immediate conflict then. And this pressure to conform. The author calls it the call to mask, right? And it isn't just for students.
No, that's a crucial point. For GLP students, their unique language, their scripts, their echoes, it isn't recognized as legitimate language use.
Oh, they get corrected.
Often, yeah. Met with correction, redirection, maybe drills focused on phonemes, breaking words down, even when it feels completely nonsensical to them. So the child learns pretty quickly that their natural way isn't acceptable. And they begin to mask, mimicking expected behaviors, hiding their whole language processing just for safety, for compliance.
Okay, that makes sense for the student experience, but how does this apply to teachers? The source argues they're called to mask too.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really illuminating. The source points specifically to California's incredibly rigorous internship and induction process, especially for the demanding education specialist teaching credential.
I heard that's intense.
It is. This process emphasizes conformity and performance. Every single lesson is evaluated against these detailed rubrics. Every deviation from prescribed methods is noted. And this crucible, which is designed, I suppose, to guarantee quality, often paradoxically produces scarcity. It contributes to teacher shortages.
Why? Because it pushes people out.
Partly, yeah. Because it prioritizes a kind of standardized performance over a teacher's individual pedagogical instinct, their ability to respond authentically to diverse learners in the moment.
So if I'm getting this right, the system effectively secures a double mask. Students have to fracture their natural whole language,
Right.
and teachers are pressured to fracture their natural teaching instincts into these standardized scripts and data points.
That's the argument. The author explains this systemic dynamic by suggesting that such systems often need a foil.
A foil, like in literature.
Kind of, yeah. Like the source uses analogies. Patriarchy needs the unruly feminine. Empire needs the colonized other. Education, in this sort of industrial form, it needs both the GLP child and the non-conforming teacher as evidence that the system itself is rigorous. Without that foil, the normal can't really define itself.
That's quite a perspective. So what practical steps could someone even take, an educator, a parent, to resist being cast in that foil role, or maybe challenge the machine that creates them?
That's a great question. And the author suggests the first step is just recognizing the machine itself, understanding how it works. And to really grasp the personal impact of this pressure, the author shares a really powerful personal experience with California's RICA. That's the Reading Instruction Competence Assessment.
The big teacher test for reading instruction.
Exactly. And as a gestalt processor, they faced this immense challenge. They actually had to pay tutors like over $1,000 just to learn how to frame answers in what they describe as an analytic straitjacket. They were essentially forced to use SRSD, self-regulated strategy development.
Okay, could you unpack SRSD a bit? Why was that the specific challenge for a gestalt processor?
Sure. SRSD is a structured approach. It helps students learn to plan and regulate their learning, often through very analytical sequential steps, breaking tasks down.
Okay, linear.
Very linear. So for the author, it meant having to mimic a completely different cognitive style. They had to rigidly script answers, basically pretend to think like an analytic processor, just to pass this test. Because the test itself, or the companies like Pearson who run it, they just don't acknowledge GLPs in their framework. It doesn't compute for them.
Wow.
So it was this profound act of masking their natural thought process just to meet the test's demands and clear their credential.
That's a truly visceral example. It really highlights what the source calls the refusal of the self.
Mm-hmm.
And it explains how teachers get pressured, maybe forced, to adopt scripted phonics programs, fill out data dashboards, even when their gut, their intuition, tells them it's actually harming students.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes it's often not a lack of individual courage, but systemic coercion. You hide your discomfort. You teach the program, not the child. Because in high-pressure environments, like California's described, your livelihood often overrides that authenticity.
And that leads to this erosion of vocation.
A profound erosion, yeah. The personal cost is immense. Your intuition gets silenced. That relational spark with students gets ignored. The dream of teaching becomes just a performance.
And kids pick up on that, don't
Oh,
they?
absolutely. Especially GLPs, the source suggests. They sense when teaching isn't authentic, when it's just rote delivery. So for GLP students, it's about hiding their scripts. For teachers, it's silencing their intuition. It's presented as a systemic choice, not an individual failing, especially when jobs and credentials are on the line.
It really makes you think, how many other professions, not just teaching, might have similar pressures? Silencing intuition for survival. And eventually something has to give, right? Which brings us to what the source calls the threshold, the break, often manifesting as artistic burnout.
Yeah, and the author is very clear here. This isn't just everyday tiredness or even, standard neurotypical exhaustion. Autistic burnout is described as a profound collapse, where the mask just consumes too much energy and the body can no longer borrow energy from the future. It's a systemic problem with deeply personal physical consequences.
And the systemic pressure is relentless.
Absolutely. If you try to protect your energy, maybe say no to unreasonable demands, you often get labeled resistant by administrators.
Right, not a team player.
Exactly. And this pressure, combined with the rise of the science of reading movement, that became a kind of last straw for the author.
How so? The science of reading is often presented as, well, a solution.
Right. Marketed as salvation. But the source argues it often functions more as a slogan, maybe a gold mine for publishers. And critically, it can lead to permanent remediation for GLPs because the methods, heavily focused on phonics and decoding, were simply not built for their whole language processing style. They're trying to teach analysis to kids who learn in wholes.
Add to that the very real structural precarity. You mentioned California's non-elect clause.
Yeah, which allows principals to dismiss new teachers without real due process in their first couple of years.
Okay.
Combine that with the staggering unemployment rates for autistic adults generally. Well, for many, compliance feels like the only survival option.
Which just accelerates the burnout.
Until the break becomes, as the author puts it, inevitable. It's a powerful illustration of how these external pressures can lead to a real internal collapse.
So after the break, what happens? The source talks about a withdrawal to sanctuary.
Yes, and this is important. It's framed not as defeat, but as a deliberate act of reclamation, finding or creating space.
Where did the author find sanctuary?
2 places, mainly. Their classroom and their writing. In the classroom, literacy started to look radically different. Messy, relational, celebrating student scripts and rhythms. No data walls, no phonics rockets plastered everywhere.
A different kind of space.
A space where refusal became practice. A haven where their students, particularly the GLPs, could maybe be themselves a bit more.
And the writing.
The writing became sanctuary by telling the truth that others perhaps refuse to name, that GLPs exist, that their learning is legitimate, and that the system often wounds them by design. It was a space to finally, consciously unmask.
The source also mentions something about using credentials as armor.
Right. The author candidly admits to using their PhD and their books as armor, what they call the shtick.
The stick.
Yeah, leaning on credentials to gain legitimacy, to carve out space in a system that tends to respect citations more than lived knowledge. But interestingly, this performance, this shtick, ultimately became a form of reclamation. It allowed them to speak their truth more effectively within that system.
From that sanctuary, then comes this descent and sorting. What does that involve?
This is where the intellectual journey really deepens, sorting out what was the mask from what was the self. It leads to this deep intellectual, political, and systemic analysis. And this is where the author turned to critical theory and even the Marxist canon.
Okay. For listeners who might be less familiar, could you briefly explain what those frameworks offer? Why were they useful for the author's understanding here?
Sure. So critical theory and the Marxist canon, they aren't presented here as like political dogma you have to adopt. They're used as analytical lenses, powerful ways to critique and understand underlying power dynamics, economic influences, how seemingly neutral systems can perpetuate inequality.
So they offer a deeper explanation for why the educational system might operate in ways that marginalize certain learners.
That's the idea. For the author, using these lenses meant understanding how literacy itself might be captured by capital, as they put it. How evidence-based approaches can become a form of enclosure, walling off other ways of knowing. How research can sometimes devolve into evidence mills, primarily for profit.
And remediation itself.
Viewed through this lens, remediation isn't just help. It can become a profit center that's sustained by the perceived failure of GLPs.
I can see how that perspective would be profoundly clarifying, if also maybe disturbing.
Definitely. And the source acknowledges that these concepts, Marxism, critical theory, often face pushback. People get wary.
Understandably.
Yeah. But for the author, engaging with thinkers like Marx, Lenin, Freire, bell hooks, Thomas Sankara, it provided, as they say, names for what I was already seeing. It made the structural pain legible. It highlighted that the erasure of GLPs isn't just an accident, but in this analysis, a kind of structural necessity within this particular economic framework.
So just to be clear for our listeners, the source uses these thinkers' ideas as analytical tools, not necessarily endorsing everything associated with them.
Precisely. The author emphasizes it's about borrowing specific analytical frameworks to understand the invisible mechanisms, how knowledge is governed, how systemic inequalities in education get perpetuated. It brings what they call a painful clarity. The struggle isn't just about reading instruction methods. It's about how capitalism, empire, patriarchy, these big systems govern knowledge, language, and care. Literacy becomes, as the author argues, a contested terrain.
Wow. That's a heavy realization. But out of this descent, this deep analysis, there emerges something positive. The source calls it the gift, self-knowing.
Yes. And the gift is this profound recognition that language is so much bigger than just phonics. It's relation, it's rhythm, gesture, story.
Yeah.
GLPs aren't broken readers. They're, quote, different narrators.
Different narrators.
Oh, yeah. And the author connects this to ancestral wisdom. There's a powerful anecdote about their Scottish grandmother and the original meaning of woke.
Oh, what was that?
For her, it meant knowledge of self, a kind of internal compass, a protection against propaganda and oppression, knowing yourself deeply.
Okay, I see the connection now.
It links directly to GLPs. Their scripts aren't failures, they're archives of meaning, their rhythms aren't distractions, they are literacy. Their way of holding language isn't delay, it's design, it's how they're built. And this self-knowing allows them, or allows us to advocate for them, to say, okay, that is your metric, not mine.
So we circle back to the beginning, the real one change.
Is not a new tool or a different method. It's a change in the metric itself. It's about fundamentally valuing how children weave meaning, how they recall songs, script stories, hold language as a whole, not just how well they can fracture words into tiny foams. And this isn't presented as like soft-hearted generosity. It's framed as survival. Recognizing different ways of knowing is essential.
So we don't return from this journey with a neat, tidy answer to, what's the one change then?
Not really, no. The author explicitly states they cannot offer a simple policy solution. Instead, the one thing becomes dismantling the foil-making machine itself, the system that demands conformity and creates these foils to define what's normal.
And the source mentions engaging with other, perhaps less commonly cited, critical thinkers helps with this dismantling.
Yes, the author describes how reading thinkers from diverse traditions like Sankara on justice and anti-imperialism, Kim Il-sung on self-sufficiency, Mao on confronting contradictions within systems, Lenin on empire and how literacy gets enclosed, and even Gaddafi on exploring alternatives to dominant political structures, acted like putting on glasses.
Glasses.
Yeah, like lenses that change your perspective, help you see hidden structures, see propaganda within seemingly neutral systems like education. Again, the author stresses this engagement wasn't about endorsing political ideologies or specific regimes, but about gaining a deeper understanding of how systems operate, how power works, and importantly, how they might be resisted or alternatives built.
So it moves beyond just surviving the system.
To actually naming it, resisting it, and maybe trying to build alternatives, however small.
Which leads, finally, to the new ordinary. What does that look like, according to the source?
It's described as quieter, perhaps, but profoundly resilient. In the classroom, it might look like half-finished poems taped to the wall, song lyrics being honored as texts, hand-drawn rhythm charts. The new metric, the author argues, is simply presence. Being present with the child, valuing their way of being.
And in the writing.
In their writing, it's a continued refusal. A refusal to let numbers dictate human worth, a refusal to collude with deficit narratives, a refusal to participate in the erasure of GLPs.
But this path isn't easy, is it? The source mentions loneliness.
Yes, there's an acknowledgement of the loneliness that can come from being, as the author puts it, maybe the one authentic person in certain educational settings, facing the sideways glances from colleagues who might not understand or agree.
How does the author cope with that?
They connect this loneliness back to Marx's concept of alienation, understanding it not as a personal failing, but as structural, a predictable byproduct of the system itself. It provides a kind of map for the why, but as they admit, it doesn't necessarily make the loneliness any lighter to carry.
So this new ordinary, it isn't presented as a cure or some kind of final triumph.
No, not in a traditional sense. It's framed more as a conscious decision to remain, to carry that alienation, perhaps, and to keep making these small, fragile, necessary sanctuaries. Places where GLPs are seen not as foils or deficits, but as keepers of knowledge.
Keepers of knowledge, that's powerful.
And there's this beautiful resonant insight right near the end. GLPs are, in a profound way, made for poetry.
Made for poetry.
Yeah. They think in wholes, in atmospheres and resonances, not just linear analysis. And the author found their own pulse, their own voice in writing poetry, advocating for letting the poem be the meaning for all students, not just dissecting it.
Wow, what a profound journey indeed. Moving from questioning those easy answers.
Right, all the way through understanding systemic masking, the burnout, the search for sanctuary.
And this deep redefinition of literacy itself through self-knowing.
Exactly.
And the ultimate refusal, as the source highlights, seems to be that the very premise of seeking one single change might actually be part of the trap itself.
That's a key takeaway.
That perhaps the most radical thing we can do, the one change that matters, is to refuse. Refuse to be consumed by systems that demand sameness and, frankly, thrive on erasure.
It's definitely a call to reevaluate our own fundamental assumptions about learning and success.
It really is. So maybe as you, our listener, reflect on this deep dive, consider what are the metrics in your own life? Or in your work, the ones you've been asked to conform to, maybe without even questioning it? And what would it mean for you to start defining your own metric, to value your own rhythm, your own way of processing, to cultivate your own unique form of self-knowing, even when the world seems to prefer shadows that are tidy and silent? How might embracing your own authentic way of engaging with the world be your most profound act of survival, and maybe even your greatest contribution?